The last stand at Joe's Diner. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune above the worn countertop of Joe's Diner, a soundtrack that had played through countless ordinary days. But this Wednesday afternoon was different. This was the day everything fell apart. Sarah Mitchell had worked at Joe's for 12 years. She started as a teenager, wiping down tables and refilling coffee cups, dreaming of saving enough money to finish college. Those dreams had faded somewhere between her mother's cancer treatments and her father's accident at the factory. Now, at 32, she was the senior waitress, wearing the same blue uniform dress that had become a second skin, a symbol of dreams deferred and promises broken. The two men in dark suits had walked in at 2:47 p.m. Sarah remembered the exact time because she'd been watching the clock, counting down the minutes until her daughter Emma's school play rehearsal. The men didn't sit down, they didn't order coffee, they stood at the counter with papers in their hands and expressions carved from stone. "Sarah Mitchell?" the taller one asked, his voice flat and professional. Her heart had started racing immediately. Nothing good ever came from men in suits who knew your full name. She glanced at her husband, Michael, standing near the door with Emma. He'd brought their 8-year-old daughter to surprise her during his lunch break, a small gesture of normalcy in their increasingly chaotic life. "That's me," she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper. The shorter man, the one with cold blue eyes that seemed to look through her rather than at her, stepped forward. He placed a thick envelope on the counter between them. The sound it made hitting the formica surface was like a judge's gavel sealing her fate. "Ms. Mitchell, we're here representing Citizens Bank. Your home loan is 90 days past due. We've sent multiple notices. This is a final foreclosure warning. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." The words hit her like physical blows. Foreclosure, vacate. 30 days. She'd known they were behind. Of course she knew, but 90 days? How had it gotten that far? The hospital bills had consumed everything. Her mother's funeral costs, the maxed-out credit cards, the car repairs Michael needed to get to his construction job before that job disappeared along with the housing market crash. "There must be some mistake," she heard herself saying, even as she knew there wasn't. "We've been making payments. We just needed a little more time." The tall man's expression didn't change. He'd probably delivered this speech 100 times, to 100 desperate families, in 100 dying towns across America. "Partial payments don't satisfy the contractual obligations, Ms. Mitchell. The bank has been more than patient. This is a legal matter now." Behind her, Sarah could hear the other waitress, Margaret, whispering to the cook. Could feel the eyes of the regular customers, people she'd served coffee to for over a decade, watching this private humiliation play out like dinner theater. The shame burned through her chest, hot and acidic. "Please," she said, and she hated how small her voice sounded, how broken. "Please, just give us a little more time. My husband just got a new job. We can catch up. I'll take extra shifts. Just please don't take our home." The shorter man finally spoke again, and there might have been the smallest flicker of something human in his eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "This isn't a negotiation, Ms. Mitchell. The process has already begun. You'll need to speak with the bank directly if you want to explore options, but I'll be honest at this stage, there typically aren't any." That's when Emma's voice cut through the diner. "Daddy, please help her." Sarah's head whipped around. Michael was moving forward now, his face a mixture of rage and helplessness. He was a good man, a strong man, who'd worked with his hands his entire life and provided for his family through sheer determination. But what could he do against banks and lawyers and systems designed to crush people like them? "You can't do this," Michael said, his voice rising. "We have a kid. Where are we supposed to go?" The taller man straightened his tie, a gesture Sarah would remember for years afterward, the casual dismissiveness of it. "That's not our concern, sir. We're just here to deliver the paperwork. You'll need to take this up with the bank." Emma clutched her father's hand, her small face pinched with confusion and fear. She was 8 years old, still young enough to believe that daddies could fix anything, that mommies were invincible, that homes were permanent places of safety. She didn't understand mortgages or foreclosures or economic collapses. She just knew something terrible was happening, and the adults she trusted were powerless to stop it. Sarah watched her daughter's face, and something inside her cracked. All those years of working double shifts, of missing school events, of sacrificing her own dreams so Emma could have a stable home, a good education, a better life than Sarah had known. All of it was evaporating like steam from the coffee she'd poured 1,000,000 times. "How did this happen?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "We did everything right." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. They hadn't done anything wrong, but they also hadn't done enough right. In America, in this town, in this economy, enough was an ever-moving target that people like them could never quite hit. Her mother's illness wasn't their fault, but the medical bills were still real. The factory closing and eliminating Michael's overtime wasn't their doing, but the lost income still mattered. The predatory loan terms they'd been too desperate and too trusting to question weren't technically illegal, but they were designed to fail. Margaret, bless her heart, had stopped whispering. She came around the counter and put a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Honey, don't you worry about your shift. Go home with your family. We'll cover for you." The kindness of it, the simple human decency, made Sarah's eyes burn with unshed tears. She nodded, unable to speak, and began untying her apron with shaking hands. The men in suits were already turning to leave, their job completed, probably on to deliver similar devastation to another family on their list. The taller one paused at the door and looked back, and for just a moment, Sarah saw something in his face. Regret, maybe, or exhaustion, or his own buried memories of how he'd once believed in justice and fairness before this job had beaten it out of him. "I'm sorry," he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Then he was gone, and the door chimed its cheerful bell as it swung shut behind them. The diner returned to its background noise, the clink of silverware, the hiss of the grill, the murmur of conversation. Life going on. For everyone except her family, life was just going on. Michael helped her out of her apron. His hands were gentle, but she could feel them trembling. They were both terrified, she realized. Not just worried or stressed or anxious, actually bone-deep terrified of what came next. "What are we going to do?" she asked him. He pulled her into his arms, and over his shoulder she could see Emma standing there in her school clothes, her backpack shaped like a ladybug, her hair in the pigtails Sarah had carefully braided that morning when the world still made sense. Her daughter was crying now, silent tears rolling down her cheeks, too scared to make a sound. "I don't know," Michael admitted into her hair. "I don't know, baby. But we'll figure it out. We always do." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Sometimes you didn't figure it out. Sometimes the system won. Sometimes working hard and playing by the rules wasn't enough. Sometimes you lost your home and your dignity and your belief that tomorrow would be better than today. Sarah pulled away and went to Emma, kneeling down so they were eye level. She wiped her daughter's tears with her thumbs, the same way she'd done when Emma was a toddler crying over skinned knees. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," she said, telling the same lie Michael had just told her, because what else could she do? "We're going to be okay." Emma threw her arms around her mother's neck, holding on like she was afraid Sarah might disappear if she let go. "I don't want to leave our house," she sobbed. "I don't want to move. What about my school? What about my friends?" Sarah had no answers. She held her daughter and looked around Joe's diner, at this place that had been a second home to her for 12 years, at these people who'd watched her grow up. Margaret was crying now, too, not even trying to hide it. Tom, the cook, had his back turned, but his shoulders were shaking. Even old Mr. Patterson, who came in every day for coffee and never said more than 3 words, had his head bowed like he was praying. This was the America they lived in now, the America where working 2 jobs wasn't enough, where getting sick could cost you everything, where the dream of home ownership was a trap disguised as an opportunity, where families could do everything right and still lose everything that mattered. Michael helped them both up. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home. Home." They still had it for 30 more days. Sarah wondered if that would make it easier or harder, knowing exactly when the end would come, being able to count down the days until they became homeless. At least in an accident, you didn't see it coming. There was no prolonged suffering, no watching the calendar and wondering which day would be your last in the house where your daughter took her first steps, said her first words, lost her first tooth. They walked out together, a small family unit against an indifferent world. The afternoon sun was bright, painfully cheerful, completely at odds with the darkness that had descended over their lives. Cars passed on the street. People walked by with shopping bags and cell phones. The world kept spinning, oblivious to the fact that everything had just ended for the Mitchells. As they drove home in their aging Honda, Emma in the back seat clutching her ladybug backpack, Sarah stared out the window at the town she'd lived in her entire life. The closed factories, the boarded-up storefronts, the foreclosure signs on house after house after house. They weren't alone in this struggle. That should have been comforting, but somehow it just made it worse. How many families were sitting around dinner tables tonight, trying to explain to their children why they had to leave the only home they'd ever known? When they pulled into the driveway, Sarah looked at their small ranch house with new eyes. It wasn't much. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that needed updating, a yard that Michael had worked so hard to maintain, but it was theirs, or it had been. For 12 years, this had been where they built their lives, where they thought they were secure. The for sale sign was already there, planted in the front yard like a gravestone. Sarah hadn't noticed it that morning. The bank must have sent someone while they were at work. Even that small dignity of putting up the sign themselves, of controlling that tiny piece of their own fate, had been taken from them. Michael saw her staring and took her hand. 30 days, he said. We have 30 days to fight this. To find a lawyer, to figure something out. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that justice would prevail, that some mistake would be uncovered, that a miracle would occur. But she was 32 years old and had spent her entire adult life watching miracles not happen for people like them. "Daddy?" Emma's voice came from the back seat, small and trembling. "Are we poor now?" The question hung in the air, brutal in its innocent directness. Were they poor? They'd never been rich, but they'd had a home. They'd paid their bills mostly on time. They'd never gone hungry. But poor wasn't just about money, Sarah realized. Poor was about powerlessness, about being at the mercy of forces you couldn't control or even fully understand, about watching men in suits take away everything you'd worked for and knowing there wasn't a damn thing you could do about it. "We have each other," Michael said finally. "That's what matters, Emma. As long as we have each other, we're rich in the ways that count." It was a beautiful sentiment. Sarah wished she could believe it. But as she looked at that for sale sign, at the house they were about to lose, at the uncertain future stretching before them, she couldn't help but think about all the ways that love, no matter how strong, couldn't pay rent or put food on the table or keep the lights on. They went inside together, and Sarah started making dinner as if this were any other day, as if their world hadn't just collapsed, as if tomorrow wasn't the first day of counting down to homelessness. The routine of it was almost comforting. The familiar motions, the smell of food cooking, the sound of Emma doing homework at the kitchen table while Michael read through the foreclosure papers with increasingly defeated eyes. But underneath it all was the knowledge that this was all temporary now. These walls, this kitchen, this life, all of it was on borrowed time. And when those 30 days ran out, they would have to walk away from everything they'd built and start over with nothing, joining the growing ranks of Americans who'd learned the hard way that the dream was dead. And in its place was only the grinding reality of survival in a country that had forgotten how to take care of its own. That night, after Emma finally fell asleep, Sarah and Michael lay in bed staring at the ceiling, holding hands in the darkness. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. The silence between them was heavy with grief and fear and the death of hope. Tomorrow, they would start fighting. They would call lawyers they couldn't afford, and banks that wouldn't listen, and social services that were overwhelmed and underfunded. They would do everything they possibly could to save their home. But tonight, in the darkness of their bedroom, they both knew the truth. They'd already lost. The men in suits had won before they even walked into Joe's diner. This was just the formality of it, the slow torture of watching it all slip away. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of the house they'd called home. 30 days. They had 30 days to say goodbye to everything they'd known, everything they had worked for, everything they'd believed about how life was supposed to work. 30 days to explain to their daughter why the world was crueler than she'd ever imagined. 30 days to pack up their lives and prepare for an uncertain future. And when those 30 days were up, they would join the invisible ranks of America's displaced, one more family destroyed by an economic system that valued profits over people, that turned homes into commodities and families into collateral damage. Just another sad story in a nation full of them, Another statistic in the ongoing tragedy of the American dream's slow death. The last thing Sarah thought before exhaustion finally pulled her under was that she still had to work tomorrow. She'd still have to put on that blue uniform and smile at customers and pour coffee and pretend everything was fine. Because that's what you did when you were drowning. You kept swimming until you couldn't anymore, and then you sank.